The contested border zone between human and Valorian space was a desolate stretch of rocky planets and debris fields where neither side wanted to commit to full occupation, but both refused to cede territory. Sergeant Marcus Webb had been patrolling this particular hellhole for 9 months, and he was thoroughly tired of the dust, the tension, and the routine missions that always carried the possibility of turning violent without warning. His squad was on day 3 of a standard reconnaissance sweep when they encountered the wreckage. At first Marcus thought it was just more debris from the ongoing skirmishes. Ships and equipment got destroyed out here with depressing regularity, and the vacuum preserved everything in grotesque permanence. But as they approached, the damage looked fresh, recent, hours old, maybe less. "Sir, those are Valorian signatures," Corporal Chen reported from the scanner station. "Multiple ships, combat configuration. Looks like they got ambushed by their own people based on the weapon signatures." "Internal conflict," Lieutenant Morrison said over the comm. "Not our problem. Standard protocol document, avoid engagement, report back to command." Marcus acknowledged the order, but something made him uneasy. The ambush had been thorough and brutal. Whoever did this wanted to make sure there were no survivors. Bodies floated in the wreckage, Valorians in their distinctive armor, their pale silver skin visible through shattered faceplates, their elegant forms twisted by violent decompression. Then he heard it. Through his suit's external audio pickups, something that shouldn't have been possible in the near vacuum. A sound so faint and desperate it bypassed every military instinct and hit something more fundamental in his brain. Someone was still alive in that wreckage. "Morrison, I'm picking up a signal. Someone's still breathing over there." "Acknowledged. Maintain distance. We don't get involved in Valorian internal matters." "Sir, they're dying. We're talking minutes, maybe less." "Not our problem, Webb. We extract, we report. Command decides if they want to notify the Valorians that we found their massacre. That's the protocol." Marcus stared at the wreckage, at the bodies, at the dying signal that was getting weaker. Protocol said leave. Common sense said leave. Military regulations said definitely leave. Every rational part of his training said this was not his business. Getting involved could spark incidents. He had orders. But he also had a conscience that apparently hadn't been completely destroyed by 2 years of border conflicts. "I'm going in," he said, already adjusting his trajectory. "Webb, that's a direct order to maintain distance." Marcus cut the comm and activated his suit's independent systems. His squad could report him for insubordination later. Right now, someone was dying and he could hear them, and every second of argument was a second they didn't have. He found her in what remained of a command pod, still strapped into the pilot's harness, her armor shattered and her body broken in ways that made Marcus's stomach turn. Valorians were beautiful in that otherworldly way that made humans uncomfortable. They were too perfect, too elegant, their proportions just slightly wrong for human aesthetics in ways that made them both compelling and unsettling. This one was clearly important based on the ceremonial engravings on her armor and the rank insignia that was still partially visible. She was tall even by Valorian standards, probably close to 7 feet if she could stand, with that characteristic pale silver skin that seemed to generate its own subtle luminescence. Her hair was long and the color of spun starlight, a silver white that shifted through subtle rainbow undertones. Her eyes, barely focused on him now, were doing that color-shifting thing Valorian's eyes did, currently cycling through fading blues and violets that Marcus knew meant severe distress or dying. Those eyes locked onto him, and she made a sound that bypassed language entirely, a desperate, pleading sound that communicated everything without words. Silver blood pooled beneath her, too much of it, and Marcus knew with sick certainty that she had minutes at most. Her armor's medical systems had failed. Her suit's life support was compromised. She was bleeding out and suffocating simultaneously, and there was nothing on his standard field kit that could help with Valorian physiology. Except for one thing. One piece of classified information that Marcus had learned during a cross-species medical training course that most soldiers never accessed. A fact that both humans and Valorians knew, but neither government openly acknowledged, because the implications were too politically complicated. Valorian physiology could accept human blood in emergency situations. Not perfectly. There would be immune responses later that required treatment, but well enough to keep someone alive long enough to reach proper medical care. The reason this information was classified was because of what blood transfusion did in Valorian culture, something called vidanash, the life bond. It created a connection so profound that Valorians considered it more binding than marriage, more sacred than family bonds. Cross-species transfusion was absolutely forbidden by both governments because it created social and political complications neither side wanted to navigate. Marcus knew all of this, understood the implications, recognized that what he was about to do would create an international incident that could destroy his military career and possibly start a war. He looked at her dying eyes and did it anyway. His combat knife was sharp enough to cut through his suit's sleeve and into his arm with quick efficiency. The pain was sharp and immediate, blood welling up red against his skin. He pressed the wound to the largest injury on her torso where her armor had been breached, holding his arm against her broken body while his blood flowed into her wounds, mixing with her silver blood, entering her system through damaged tissues that couldn't reject it in her current state. She made a sound, surprise, maybe, or recognition. Her color-shifting eyes brightened fractionally, focusing on him with new intensity. She tried to speak, her lips forming Valorian words he didn't understand, but her hand, her two long fingers with their elegant proportions, gripped his arm with desperate strength, holding him against her like she was afraid he'd pull away. Marcus held position, watching his blood flow into her, feeling lightheaded from the loss and from the sheer insanity of what he was doing. He was saving an enemy soldier, potentially a high-ranking enemy commander based on her armor, by creating a forbidden bond that would complicate both their lives in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. But he couldn't just watch her die, couldn't look into those fading, color-shifting eyes and do nothing when he had the ability to help. She whispered something in Valorian, her voice barely audible even through his helmet's enhanced audio. Her hand squeezed his arm, and for a moment Marcus felt something strange, like a pulse that wasn't his own heartbeat, like awareness of her that went beyond just physical proximity. Then his squad found him. "Jesus Christ, Webb, what are you doing?" Chen's voice was horrified over the comm. "Medical emergency transfusion," Marcus said, which was technically accurate if wildly understating the situation. "That's a Valorian. Sir Morrison, Webb's giving blood to an enemy combatant." Everything happened very quickly after that. Marcus was physically pulled away from her despite his protests and hers. She was crying out in Valorian. Words he didn't need translation to understand were protests or pleas, trying to hold on to him with strength that was returning as his blood worked through her system. He was dragged back to the transport, his arm hastily bandaged, while Morrison's voice came through his helmet speakers with barely controlled fury. "Do you have any idea what you just did? Do you have any concept of the shitstorm you just created?" Marcus did, actually. But looking back at the wreckage where the Valorian woman was now being secured by the rest of his squad, her color-shifting eyes still locked on him with desperate intensity, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. He'd saved her life. Whatever came next, he'd deal with it. But at least she was alive to complicate his future rather than dead and haunting his conscience. The transport ride back to base was silent except for Morrison's periodic angry mutterings and the medical officer's concerned monitoring of Marcus's vitals. Marcus sat in isolation, his arm throbbing, his head spinning, and that weird awareness still present, like he could sense the Valorian woman even though she was in a separate compartment being kept alive by military medical equipment that wasn't quite designed for her species. When they reached base, he was immediately sent to medical isolation. not just for the blood loss and potential exposure to Valorian pathogens, but because he was now a security risk and a diplomatic problem of unprecedented magnitude. Through the isolation ward's window, he could see his commanding officers talking in heated tones with medical staff, and beyond them, screens displaying what looked like emergency communications with higher command. Marcus lay on the medical bed, stared at the ceiling, and wondered what exactly he'd just done to both their lives. He'd saved a dying enemy soldier with his blood, creating a bond that both their species considered forbidden and unbreakable. He suspected that was just the beginning of the complications. 3 days in isolation gave Marcus plenty of time to research what he'd done. The base's medical library had restricted files on Valorian physiology and culture that he probably wasn't supposed to access. But his security clearance hadn't been fully revoked yet, and he used that window to learn everything he could about Vidnash before someone inevitably came to debrief him. What he learned was not reassuring. The life bond wasn't metaphorical or cultural superstition. It was biological reality. Valorians had evolved on a harsh world where survival often meant forming instant alliances with whoever could help you survive the next disaster. Their species developed the ability to create profound bonds through blood exchange. Their immune systems didn't just accept foreign blood, they integrated aspects of it, creating permanent biological recognition of the donor. Once a Valorian received life-saving blood from another being, they were biochemically bonded to that donor. They could sense the donor's proximity, their general emotional state, even vague impressions of their well-being. The bond created a resonance between individuals that most Valorians described as being aware of each other the way you're aware of your own heartbeat, constant, subconscious, fundamental. For the recipient, the bond was all-consuming. They were Vidnash, bonded for life, and Valorian culture dictated that they owed their savior absolute loyalty until the debt was repaid. Since the debt was life itself, repayment was considered impossible. The bonded individual was expected to serve their savior, protect them, remain with them. Leaving your Vidnash was the highest dishonor in Valorian society. For the donor, the bond was less intense but still present. They would develop awareness of the recipient, though not as strongly. Some donors reported feeling protective, possessive even, of those bonded to them. Cross-species Vidnash was forbidden precisely because it created these complications across political and social boundaries that weren't designed to accommodate them. Marcus had saved a Valorian's life with his blood. She was now bonded to him in ways his species didn't have cultural frameworks to process, and he was apparently bonded to her in ways he was only beginning to understand. The awareness was definitely real. He could sense her location in the base even through the isolation walls, could feel vague impressions of her emotional state, distress initially, then calm, then what felt like determination. It was unsettling and intimate, and not something he knew how to turn off. On the 4th day, he was summoned to a briefing room. Not just his immediate commanding officers, but brass from higher up, intelligence officers, and, most intimidatingly, a delegation of Valorians in formal diplomatic attire that marked them as official representatives. And on the main view screen, connected remotely from the medical ward where she was being treated, was her. She looked better than when he'd found her dying in the wreckage. The medical team had stabilized her injuries, and Valorian physiology healed quickly once given proper support. She was sitting up in the medical bed, wearing a simple gown that was probably the best the human medical staff could provide for her 7-foot frame, her starlight hair unbound and falling past her shoulders, her color-shifting eyes currently a steady violet. The moment Marcus entered the room, those eyes locked onto him with laser intensity. Her entire demeanor changed, her posture straightening, her expression shifting from diplomatic neutrality to something fierce and focused. She said something in rapid Valorian, her voice carrying absolute authority despite the medical setting. The translation came through speakers a second later, rendered in flat mechanical English. He must be returned to me. The bond was formed. I felt his life enter mine. He is mine as I am his. Human laws do not supersede Vidanash. I will not leave without him. One of Marcus's commanding officers, General Hammond, who looked like he'd been dealing with this situation for days and was thoroughly done with it, spoke carefully. Your Highness, we understand Valorian cultural practices, but Sergeant Webb is a human soldier under our military jurisdiction. He provided emergency medical assistance. He didn't intend to create any permanent bond. That intention is irrelevant to Vidanash, came the translated response. The bond exists. It is real. It is sacred. Refusing to honor it is profound insult to Valorian culture and to my position. Your position, another officer said, checking notes, which we've now confirmed is Princess Zareth, third in line to the Valorian throne and ranking military commander. Ma'am, Your Highness, you were the target of an assassination attempt by rival factions in your own government. Sergeant Webb saved your life. We understand you're grateful, but surely you recognize that holding him to a cultural bond he didn't understand at the time is. He understood, Zareth interrupted, and her eyes remained fixed on Marcus even through the view screen. His medical database contains information about Vidanash. He accessed it before coming to save me. He knew what would happen and chose to give his blood anyway. This makes the bond even more sacred. He gave knowing full cost. Shit. They checked his data access logs. Marcus had known that was possible, but had been too focused on learning about the bond. General Hammond looked at Marcus with an expression that clearly said they'd be having a very unpleasant conversation later. Sergeant, did you know about the Vidanash bond before providing blood to Princess Zareth? Yes, sir, Marcus admitted, because lying at this point would only make things worse. I accessed classified files about Valorian physiology during my medical training. I knew that blood transfusion would create a bond. I did it anyway because she was dying, and I had seconds to decide. So you knowingly created a forbidden bond with an enemy commander. I knowingly saved someone's life, sir. The bond was a consequence, not the goal. The consequence, said one of the Valorian diplomats, is that you now have Vidanash with Princess Zareth. By our laws, she cannot return home without you. She is bound to you until death. You are bound to her, though less intensely. This bond supersedes your military service, your national loyalty, and any human laws that conflict with it. That's ridiculous, General Hammond said bluntly. He's a soldier with duties and responsibilities. He can't just be handed over to a Valorian princess because of some cultural ritual. It is not ritual, the diplomat said coldly. It is biological and cultural reality. The bond exists whether you acknowledge it or not. Princess Zareth has invoked Vidanash rights. She is within her authority to remain here until Sergeant Webb is released to her custody. She's refusing to leave. Another officer clarified unnecessarily. She's camped outside the base in an unarmed shuttle, broadcasting demands to see her Vidanash, and refusing all negotiations until we return what belongs to her. Marcus looked at the view screen, at Zareth's intense violet gaze fixed on him. Can I speak to her, actually talk to her, not through you all? There was hesitation, consultation in rapid, quiet voices. Finally, General Hammond nodded tersely. 5 minutes, supervised, do not make this worse. The others cleared the room somewhat, though Marcus was aware of observers behind one-way glass and recording equipment capturing everything. On the view screen, Zareth remained focused solely on him, her color-shifting eyes never wavering. Your Highness, Marcus started, unsure of proper protocol. Zareth, she corrected, her English accented but clear. You saved my life, you gave me your blood, you are my Vidanash. We do not use titles with those who own our lives. I don't own your life, I don't want to own anyone. Yet you do. The bond was formed. I felt your essence enter mine, felt your life force mixing with my blood, sustaining me when I should have died. Her hand moved to her chest. I feel you now even through distance and walls. I know you are here, know you are alive. This is Vidanash, this is sacred truth. Zareth, I'm human. We don't have this bond in our culture. I was just trying to help. I didn't mean to claim you or whatever this means in your society. Intention matters less than action. You gave your blood knowing what it would mean. You chose to save me despite forbidden nature of the bond. This makes your gift even more profound. She leaned toward the camera, her expression intense. I am Vidanash to you, Marcus Webb. I am bound to you by blood and breath and life itself. I cannot return home without you. Will not. Your government can refuse to acknowledge the bond, but this does not make it less real. What do you want? Marcus asked, aware his time was running out. I want what is owed to me by sacred bond. I want my Vidanash returned. I want to fulfill my duty to the one who saved me. I want, she hesitated, showing vulnerability for the first time. I want to understand the one whose life now flows in my veins. You are part of me now. I would know you. The 5 minutes ended. Marcus was escorted out while Zareth watched him go, her eyes following him until he was out of camera range. Back in his quarters, no longer medical isolation but still very much under surveillance, Marcus lay on his bunk and thought about the impossible situation he'd created. He'd saved an enemy princess, creating a bond both their species considered sacred and forbidden. She was refusing to leave without him, claiming he belonged to her by right of Vidanash. His own government didn't know what to do with him. He'd violated protocols, created a diplomatic incident, and gotten tangled up in cultural practices humanity wasn't equipped to handle. And through it all, he could feel her presence. That awareness the files had described. He knew she was somewhere in the base, knew she was awake and thinking about him, knew the bond was real and growing stronger rather than fading. He'd given his blood to save a dying woman. She'd become his Vidanash, bonded to him forever by her culture's laws. Marcus had a feeling this was only the beginning of the complications, and he had no idea how any of it would resolve. The compromise took 2 weeks to negotiate, involved 4 levels of both governments, and satisfied absolutely nobody. But it was the best either side could achieve given the unprecedented situation. Sergeant Marcus Webb would be granted extended leave from active military duty to serve as a cultural liaison specialist to Princess Zareth, while both governments worked through the political and diplomatic implications of their Vidanash bond. He wasn't exactly a prisoner, but he wasn't exactly free either. His duty was now to remain in proximity to Zareth while she stayed on human territory, effectively bound to her by military order as much as by the biological bond. Zareth would be granted diplomatic status and allowed to remain on the human base while the situation was resolved. She couldn't return home without her Vidanash. That would dishonor both the bond and her position, so she would effectively be in exile until Marcus was cleared to go with her or until some other solution was found. Neither option seemed likely in the near future, so they were stuck together in a strange limbo that was part diplomatic assignment, part house arrest, and part forced cohabitation due to cultural bonds neither had fully chosen. They were assigned shared quarters in the diplomatic section of the base, a suite that was larger than Marcus's usual barracks, but still felt cramped with a 7-foot Valorian princess occupying it. The space had separate sleeping areas but a shared common room, and the layout made privacy somewhat theoretical at best. The first few days were profoundly awkward. Zareth moved through the space with that impossible Valorian grace, never quite bumping into things despite being too tall for human-scaled furniture, her starlight hair catching light in ways that didn't follow normal physics. She watched Marcus constantly with those color-shifting eyes, currently cycling through curious golds and greens, and he tried to ignore the way his awareness of her location had intensified now that they were in close proximity. She spoke English well enough for basic communication, and Marcus was attempting to learn Valorian with limited success. They established basic routines, meal times, space sharing, how to coexist in quarters designed for humans with a Valorian who technically owned him by her culture's laws. One evening, about a week into their arrangement, Marcus found her standing by the small window in their common area, looking out at the base beyond. Her posture was different than her usual rigid elegance. There was something almost defeated about it. "Are you okay?" he asked, moving to stand near her but not too close. "I am Vidanash," she said quietly, her eyes reflecting the lights outside. "I should be serving you, protecting you, fulfilling my duty to the one who saved me. Instead, I stand useless in small rooms, bringing complications to your life rather than value. This is not how the bond should work. You're not bringing complications. Well, you are, but that's not your fault. I'm the one who created this situation. You saved my life when you could have left me to die. You asked nothing in return. You did not know what form the bond would take. You only knew you could not bear to witness my death when you might prevent it." She turned to look at him, her eyes shifting to soft violet. "This is who you are, Marcus Webb. You value life over politics. You place compassion above duty. These are rare qualities. I am honored to be bound to someone of such character." "But I'm really not that noble," Marcus protested. "I just couldn't watch you die." "Exactly. You could not bear to witness suffering you had power to prevent. You prioritized my life over every protocol, every rule, every potential consequence. You are precisely as noble as I said." She moved closer, and Marcus felt that awareness spike, his nerves lighting up with consciousness of her proximity. "And I find myself grateful for the Vidanash bond, Marcus. I do not wish to be released from it. Even if such a thing were possible, I would choose to remain connected to you." "Zareth," Marcus struggled to articulate the complexity of what he felt. "Your Valorian royalty. I'm a human soldier. Even without all the political complications, we're fundamentally different beings from species that have been in conflict. This bond complicates both our lives impossibly." "Yes," she agreed simply. "And yet here we stand, bonded by blood that neither politics nor species differences can erase. My life flows with yours. Your presence soothes something in me I cannot adequately explain. When you are near, I feel complete. When you are distant, even across this small quarters, I feel your absence like missing something essential." She reached out, her long, elegant fingers touching his face gently. "This is not merely the Vidanash speaking. The bond creates awareness, foundation for connection. But what I feel beyond that awareness is my own choice. I choose to value you. I choose to wish for your company. I choose to care deeply about your well-being beyond duty." Marcus's heart was doing complicated acrobatics. Her touch was cool against his skin, and he realized this was the first time since the blood transfusion that she deliberately touched him. "I can feel the bond too," he admitted. "I know where you are in the quarters without looking. I can sense when your mood shifts. When you're distressed, I feel it like an ache. It's intimate in ways I wasn't prepared for." "And beyond the bond?" Zareth asked, her violet eyes searching his face. "Beyond what the Vidanash creates between us, do you feel anything that is your choice rather than biological imperative?" Marcus knew he should maintain distance, should remember all the reasons this was complicated and impossible. But looking at her, this beautiful, intense alien princess who was bound to him by blood and choice, he couldn't deny what had been growing over the past weeks. "Yes," he said quietly, "I care about you, more than the bond explains. I enjoy your company. I want to understand you better. I find myself protective of you in ways that go beyond the Vidanash. When you laugh at something I've said or shown you about human culture, it makes me happy. When you're sad about being separated from your home, I want to fix it. That's not the bond. That's me choosing to care about you as a person." Zareth's skin, which Marcus hadn't realized could shift colors like her eyes, flushed with subtle luminescence, her silver tone taking on hints of pink and gold. Then, We are both making choices beyond what the bond demands. This is significant. It's also terrifying, Marcus admitted. Our governments are using us as a political football. There are people in both our species who consider what we have to be forbidden or shameful. I don't know how we navigate any of this. We navigate it together, Zareth said simply, her hand still against his face. The bond has given us foundation, awareness of each other that cannot be denied or hidden. We build everything else through choice and courage. I choose you, Marcus Webb, not because Vidanash demands it, but because you are worthy of being chosen. Marcus reached up to cover her hand with his, feeling the coolness of her silver skin against his warmth. I choose you too, Zareth, despite every complication, despite every reason this is impossible. I choose this. She moved closer, eliminating the careful distance they'd been maintaining, and Marcus felt the bond flare with awareness. She was near. She was his Vidanash, his to protect and care for by biological imperative that was becoming indistinguishable from emotional choice. When she leaned down, she was significantly taller even without her armor. He met her halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was both tentative and electric. Valorian physiology was different enough that kissing felt strange at first. Her lips were cooler than human, her mouth structured slightly differently. But underneath the differences was fundamental compatibility that transcended species. She made a sound that his translator rendered as surprised pleasure, her arms coming around him with that Valorian strength that was always carefully controlled around more fragile humans. When they separated, her eyes were brilliant gold. He'd learned this meant joy or intense positive emotion, and her skin was glowing with that pink-gold luminescence that seemed to indicate affection. I am yours, she said softly in Valorian, then repeated it in English. Vidanash and choice both. I am yours, Marcus. And I'm yours, Marcus responded, feeling the truth of it in the bond in his heart, in the way she fit against him despite all their differences. They had months ahead of complicated negotiations, political maneuvering, and figuring out how to build a life together across species lines. They would face opposition from both sides, humans who saw him as a traitor, Valorians who thought she was dishonoring herself. The Vidanash bond would continue to complicate their situation in ways neither could fully predict, but they had each other. They had a bond neither had chosen but both were choosing to honor. They had growing love that transcended the biological connection, built on mutual respect and genuine caring. Marcus had saved a dying princess with his blood, creating a forbidden bond. She had refused to let him go, honoring a connection he barely understood. Together they were choosing to transform that bond from obligation into something far more profound, a love that honored both the Vidanash and their own free will. As they stood together in their shared quarters, holding each other across the gap of species and culture, Marcus realized that sometimes the most forbidden connections become the most precious. Sometimes blood shared in desperation creates foundations for love built in choice. Sometimes saving one life changes two lives forever in ways that are complicated and messy and absolutely worth it. Zareth would never let him out of her sight, not because the bond demanded it, but because she loved him. Marcus would never want to leave her sight, not because he was Vidanash to her, but because he loved her back. And that choice, that deliberate decision to build something beautiful from a bond that was supposed to be forbidden, that was what made their story worth telling. 6 months later, Marcus and Zareth had found a rhythm that worked for them despite continued political complications. Both governments had reluctantly accepted that separating them was both culturally impossible and, given the obvious genuine relationship that had developed, ethically questionable. Marcus had been officially reassigned as a permanent cultural liaison. Zareth had accepted a formal diplomatic position representing Valorian interests in human space. They shared quarters that had been upgraded to accommodate a 7-foot Valorian and a human who'd gotten used to her constant presence. They'd learned each other's languages well enough for real communication. They'd navigated the challenges of cross-species relationship, different cultural expectations, biological differences, the constant awareness of each other that the Vidanash created. The bond had strengthened naturally. Marcus could now sense Zareth's emotional state clearly, could feel when she was happy or distressed, knew her location almost instinctively. For her part, Zareth claimed she was so attuned to him that she could sense his well-being from anywhere on the base and sometimes beyond. One night, lying together in the larger bed they'd eventually gotten to accommodate both their sizes, Zareth traced the scar on Marcus's arm where he'd cut himself to save her life so many months ago. "This mark," she said softly in Valorian, which Marcus now understood without translation, "represents the moment everything changed. The moment you gave me life. The moment I became yours and you became mine." "I never meant to claim you," Marcus said, covering her hand with his, feeling the familiar coolness of her silver skin. "I just couldn't let you die." "I know. That is precisely why the claiming is so perfect." Her eyes, currently warm gold in the dim quarters, fixed on his face. "You gave me life expecting nothing in return. You gave me yourself without knowing what it would cost you. You offered everything because your nature demanded it, because watching suffering you could prevent was intolerable to you. How could I not love you for that?" "Love," Marcus repeated, and the word still felt simultaneously too big and exactly right. "Yes, love. Your language has excellent word for what I feel. In Valorian we have korethsa, recognition of souls, but love is simpler, more direct. Love captures the truth." She shifted closer, her considerable height making her the larger presence even lying down. "I love you, Marcus Webb, not because Vidanash demands it, but because you are worthy of love, because you value life over politics, because you touch me with gentleness despite knowing I am stronger, because you laugh at my observations about human culture, because you are kind and brave and impossibly stubborn about doing what you believe is right." "I love you too," Marcus said, meaning it with every part of himself that wasn't bound by the Vidanash and every part that was. "My impossible Valorian princess who refused to let me out of her sight." "Never," Zareth confirmed, her luminescent skin glowing with that pink-gold color he'd learned meant deep affection. "You saved me with your blood. I kept you with my heart. You are mine as I am yours. This is Vidanash. This is love. This is choice." She paused, then added in English with careful pronunciation, "This is forever." "Forever," Marcus agreed, pulling her closer despite the size difference, feeling the Vidanash bond pulse with awareness and affection, and the certainty that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Outside their quarters, two species were slowly, carefully building peace after years of conflict. Marcus and Zareth had become unlikely symbols of that peace, proof that bonds could form across species lines, that forbidden connections could become bridges rather than